2019 March Madness NBA mock draft for the lottery, picks 1 through 14. I'm Andy Katz here outside the Barclays Center. It is sweltering here. It feels like July in New York City, and it's going to be pretty hot inside because we've got one of the hottest #1 picks since LeBron James was selected #1 overall in 2003 by the Cleveland Cavaliers. And really, since 2003, there's probably been 4 other instances where there's been a consensus #1. You think back to Derrick Rose, who went to Chicago, or Blake Griffin, who went to the Clippers, or John Wall went to the Wizards, Anthony Davis to New Orleans Pelicans, now soon an LA Laker. Those 4 names since LeBron James were consensus #1s, but basically this is #5 since 2003. Zion Williamson unquestionably will be the #1 draft pick going to New Orleans, and that's where we're going to start here with our mock draft. Zion Williamson, the freshman from Duke, going #1 to the New Orleans Pelicans. This has been the worst kept secret since New Orleans got that #1 draft pick when we found that out in Chicago last month with the NBA draft lottery. He can do a little bit of everything. In college basketball this past season, he made a name for himself on day 1 because he was not the consensus #1 before that game against Kentucky, where he really put on a show in the Champions Classic. It was really his teammate, who we'll get to momentarily, RJ Barrett, who was really the consensus #1 going into it. And Zion Williamson maybe needs to shed a few pounds, we'll see, but bottom line is he can score from a variety of spots on the floor, he can dunk over you, even in the NBA, and he's healthy from that knee injury that kept him out for a little bit of a spell before he was the ACC tournament MVP and leading Duke to that Elite 8 matchup against Michigan State before they lost to go to the Final Four. Michigan State beat them, they go to the Final Four. Duke's season ended in Washington, D.C. All right, #2. This was a bit of a surprise if you'd asked me earlier in the season. Not now. Ja Morant going to the Memphis Grizzlies, and Morant burst onto the scene throughout the course of the college basketball season with his tremendous play at the point as a lead guard, just basically leaping over everyone. He was a viral sensation at Murray State. Now, Ja Morant, a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because he was under-recruited. That's why he went to Murray State. But where he really showed himself was in the NCAA tournament against Marquette, a triple-double, before ultimately they lost to Florida State in the next round. But Ja Morant coming in as a game changer at that position. And Memphis clearly thinks high enough of Ja Morant because they traded their anchor at the at the point in Mike Conley Jr. So they shipped him off to Utah, basically handing the keys to that position to Ja Morant. So I mentioned RJ Barrett. Well, there's a lot of chatter here in New York City. The Knicks could maybe flirt with that #3 pick and maybe even think about Darius Garland. I just can't see it. RJ Barrett was the #1 pick in this draft prior to the season, so he slides to #3. New York fans were disappointed they didn't get Zion Williamson. Well, you essentially got a #1 draft pick and will get one in RJ Barrett. Once again, a player that can score in a variety of ways from Canada, who's just basically scratching the surface of his ability. And RJ Barrett can have a major impact on the New York Knicks immediately next season. This is a tremendous pickup for the Knicks. It'll be like getting a #1 draft pick, even though it's at #3. So 1, 2, 3 essentially are locked in. I just don't see 3 changing at all. And that's where this draft is probably more unique than most, because we haven't seen the top 3 picks be this locked in for quite some time. So this NBA draft really will start at #4. And that's where I've seen a number of different scenarios, and I've had a number of different players at this position. I'm now on my 3rd player, and I'm going to stick with this one for Darius Garland from Vanderbilt. Only played in 5 games before he injured and tore his meniscus. Basically went and rehabbed elsewhere, left school to make sure he was healthy enough to be able to be in this position. Now, Darius Garland, had he been healthy, first off, Vanderbilt would not have been 0-18 in the SEC. And you could probably have made a strong case that Garland would have been right there with Ja Morant to be the top point guard taken. But after only 5 games, it's kind of hard to judge that. And yet Garland has drawn a lot of attention from NBA teams. Cleveland also would love to get up there. A lot of teams would love to get up there. And that's why there's a good chance, very hot out here, good chance that New Orleans will try to move this pick, because there's going to be plenty of suitors. They could maybe get multiple picks for #4, maybe a veteran player. But if they were to keep him, and you were to have Darius Garland with Lonzo Ball, throwing alley-oops to Zion Williamson, with Drew Holiday on that roster as well, that would certainly be an anchor group for New Orleans to start moving up in the Western Conference. All right, so Garland going number 4. That changes some things up for me, and that's where I find the Cleveland Cavaliers taking DeAndre Hunter at number 5. I love this pick for John Beilein, the former Michigan coach who's now the head coach at Cleveland, because what Beilein wants is he wants ready players who like to play defense, who've got a skill set. He was coached by Tony Bennett, who John Beilein has tremendous admiration for. And John Beilein, for years, has worked on fundamentals with his guys deep into the season, even at the Final Four a couple of years ago. Now, with veteran guys, he's not going to have to do that. With younger guys, he would. But DeAndre Hunter will do exactly what John Beilein would want. He will run the system. He'll be an efficient screener. Everything would be perfect for Hunter. And that's why, once Hunter would go 5, I'm sliding Jarrett Culver to 6. Initially, at one point, I had Darius Garland here for Phoenix, but Culver at this juncture becomes the best player available. And Culver certainly could be someone who goes up as high as number 4. Out of Texas Tech, Jarrett Culver led the Red Raiders to the national championship game. It was a year ago where he was not the main player on that team that was a number 2 seed and got to the Elite 8. Comes back with a younger group and leads them to a co-Big 12 championship. Jarrett Culver loves to play defense. His offensive game is only getting better. He was the first Texas Tech player to score over 1,000 points in just 2 seasons. Phoenix, which needs a lot of help, could certainly get some with Jarrett Culver. All right, so moving on now to the number 7 pick with Chicago. So what do the Bulls do here? Because Culver off the board, DeAndre Hunter off the board. With Chris Dunn, you don't know if he's a long-term commitment there for Chicago at that position, and that's why Kobe White becomes the next best available point guard, lead guard for the Bulls at this position. Coached by Roy Williams at North Carolina, Kobe White really just continued to improve throughout the course of the season. Saw them early, saw them late, and it'll be a great pick for the Bulls because Kobe White can electrify a crowd with the floppy hair, which he says he's not cutting, and he's only going to get better at that position. So we want to review at this point my top 7. So we're halfway through the lottery. Zion Williamson, John Morant, R.J. Barrett, Darius Garland. We'll see if that pick stays at 4. DeAndre Hunter, great pick for Cavs at 5. Jarrett Culver, I think, another steal for Phoenix at 6. And then Kobe White for the Chicago Bulls at number 7. We want to take a question here, and we were hoping that you'd have some for us as we take a quick pause here in our 14 in the mock draft. All right, so which sleeper player do you think will outform his draft spot? My answer here, Brad, is Carson Edwards. I am extremely high on Carson Edwards from Purdue. I see him going possibly to the Boston Celtics with maybe around the 2020, in the 20s for one of the Celtics picks. And if the Celtics take him, because I don't think they're going to keep Kyrie Irving, Terry Rozier is not the long-term answer. Who knows if he'll be there? Carson Edwards could step on the court right now and make a major contribution. He's built like a tank. He's a big shot maker. 42 points in that overtime Elite 8 loss to Virginia, 42 against Villanova, 36 earlier in the season, an overtime win against Wisconsin. Carson Edwards is ready to contribute at this moment, can make big shots, was shooting NBA threes anyway during the college basketball season, and he can get to the rim and finish. I think he will be a steal and will be looked at as one of the best players in this draft, even though he may not go until the 20s. All right, let's continue with our mock draft here. We're going to pick up at number 8. And that's where Cam Reddish will end up going, potentially, to the Atlanta Hawks. And Reddish is sort of, I like to think of him as sort of like the 5th Beatle, because ultimately he was a player that didn't get all the attention that was probably deserving for him. Ended up hitting that big shot to beat Florida State, but he got outshined, if you will, by Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, even Trey Jones. And Cam Reddish, there's been some criticism about his motor, and maybe that's not fair. I wasn't there every day, and a lot of these people that are saying that weren't there every day either. But he also didn't have the personality that those other players do. He wasn't as much part, I should say, of that mini brotherhood between RJ and Zion that we even saw on Wednesday here, where they were kidding around with each other, filming each other. So Cam Reddish, if he goes to Atlanta, I think he will flourish next to Trae Young as a complementary player who can score, make big buckets for the Hawks. All right, let's switch on to number 9 with the Washington Wizards. Look, if they don't go international with Sekou Doumbouya, I could definitely see them going with this man here, Nasir Little for Washington, out of North Carolina. The compliment to Kobe White, and what was a little unfair of Little is Little ended up having more of a normal freshman year. okay? When he came in with a ton of hype. He's just a slow starter, and that's normal to have some sort of maturation process in college basketball. So once again, his ceiling, he hasn't even bumped into it yet. And with Washington, with John Wall, who knows what's going to happen there long term. Nasir Little has the potential to be an exemplary sort of wing, big guard, play a little, can handle the ball, can do a little bit of everything for them offensively. I think he's too good at that spot to pass up. If they don't go international, if they stay with an American college basketball player, I could see them going with Nasir Little. All right, at 10, let's go back to the Atlanta Hawks. And that's where we find Texas center Jackson Hayes. Now, Hayes was hurt for the NIT run for Texas, so that's why maybe you didn't see him as much in the postseason. But Texas has a great history of big men that have played in the NBA. Go back to LaMarcus Aldridge. I don't care who the coaches, Rick Barnes or Shaka Smart. You got Aldridge, you got Mo Bamba most recently, Miles Turner. There's been bigs that have had great success coming out of Texas. And Jackson Hayes and Jared Allen, who played, by the way, in this building behind me for Brooklyn. Jackson Hayes could be the next player. He can find the rim. He can just run and go up and get it for you. Hayes, offensively, will only continue to blossom in his role. And for Atlanta, let's assume here that they're going to go with a wing to complement Trae Young. They're going to need a big in that 10 spot. And that's why I've got Jackson Hayes going to the Hawks at number 10. All right, let's continue on with our mock draft at number 11. And at number 11, that's where I've got Rui Hachimura of Gonzaga going to the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves and the Charlotte Hornets are teams that definitely covet Rui Hachimura. Rui, you could argue, is one of the more improved players in college basketball over the last couple of seasons. Came in from Japan. He will end up being the first Japanese player ever drafted. There have been others that have been playing in the NBA. He'll become the first Japanese player ever to have been drafted, and we're going to see over 40 members of the Japanese media who will be here on hand to watch this occur. Hachimura, he can handle the ball, he can score from the perimeter, he can get to the rim. Defensively, he's only going to get better, and he's a sponge. He came to this country still learning the game, still learning English, so the terminology of the sport is improving, and he's a great locker room guy. Wherever he lands up, if he lands up in Minnesota, he will adapt immediately. And get ready, Minnesota, because you're going to see a huge Japanese media presence, similar to what we've seen on the tennis tour with Naomi Osaka. You're going to see something similar to that with Rui Hachimura. All right, at number 12, now that Charlotte lost out on the chance in our mock draft to get Rui, they're going to go to Kentucky. And that's where, if Charlotte doesn't go international, I see them taking potentially P.J. Washington of Kentucky. Washington, another player who came back instead of going to the NBA draft a year ago because he wasn't ready, improved his game, became much more assertive, much more mature. The way he was able to score in the post, face up, a major contributor to why Kentucky ended up in the Elite Eight matchup against Auburn. He was hurt in the NCAA tournament, came back because he did not want to leave his teammates behind and not give his best effort, even though he didn't know if he could play going forward because of a foot injury, and yet he was able to do so. They didn't get to the Final Four, just losing in overtime to Auburn, but a tremendous season for P.J. Washington, another player who is coming to the NBA draft at the right time, and I think if he ends up at Charlotte, that's a great pick. They've had good success with Kentucky players who have played under John Calipari. All right, number 13, Miami, always a tough team to figure out what they're going to do in the NBA draft. Could go, certainly international, could go big, but the next best player here, if he gets to this point, is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. From Virginia Tech, he played the 1 and the 2 for the Hokies this past season, helping them go to the Sweet 16. When Justin Robinson was hurt, their lead guard, then Alexander-Walker was pressed into having to play and put his hands on the ball much more often, and did a great job with that for Buzz Williams. So he could come into the Miami Heat, which no more Dwayne Wade. They're going to need someone who can handle the ball, can play the 1 and the 2, and score from that position, and he could deliver that for them from day one. All right, to wrap up the lottery, at number 14, the Boston Celtics, the first of 3 picks for the Celtics. As I said earlier, I think Carson Edwards could end up with the Celtics in one of their picks in the 20s. If the Celtics don't go international here, I could definitely see them going with Brandon Clark from Gonzaga. Danny Ainge has, loved the Gonzaga players out west. He's recruited them before. Brandon Clark has ended up being one of the more improved players in college basketball. Sat out from transferring from San Jose State. He's a rim protector, which they're going to need. We don't know about Al Horford right now, Marcus Morris, Aaron Baines. They need a big. They need a player who's experienced, who's versatile, who can go and get, look, he shot over 70% from the field. And why is that? Because he had a lot of dunks, because he's around the basket. He also blocked plenty of shots, was one of the best shot blockers in the country. So he's got a nose for the basketball, loves to rebound. He's got a skill set that Brad Stevens, Danny Ainge, and the Celtics would absolutely love. All right, so that's our mock draft 1 through 14. We'll see how I do. You're going to hold me to it, of course. And, of course, there could be a couple international guys that will slide into that as well. But I feel pretty confident, certainly for the top 3. And then with a number of these other guys, for the most part, I think will be in this top 14. But I want to take a couple questions from you from our social media platforms here. So let's start off here. Will Kyle Guy's game translate to the NBA? Well, look, shooting is always a need in the NBA. And if Kyle Guy is with the right team and the right point guard, which ultimately I think he will, and I think Kyle will be drafted somewhere in the second round, he's got a great shot. Got to get bigger, got to get stronger. Not going to grow necessarily, but he's got to, obviously be able to take contact. Is he as consistent a shooter as J.J. Redick? No. But could he become a sort of off-the-bench game changer to extend a lead, to stop a rally, to come in and hit a three? Yes. He's got to continue to work on his ball handling, but these are all positives. He's got a great attitude, and I think what we're going to see going forward, when you think about Malcolm Brogdon's success at Milwaukee from Virginia, players that play for Tony Bennett, other coaches in the NBA are going to want those kind of players, and I think we're going to see that, no question, with DeAndre Hunter and with Ty Jerome, who's going to be somewhere in the first round, and Kyle Guy. All right, let's take one more question from social media. All right, where do you see Grant Williams of Tennessee ending up? Is his size a potential downside for any interested NBA team? And that comes from Dustin. So if you've been following us on social media, interviewed Grant Williams last night. You can see the post on March Madness. One of my favorite players in college basketball. Unbelievable high character. He gets it. And if he were to go to a team like Cleveland, like with John Beilein, he'll come in off the bench, he'll run the system, he'll do what he's supposed to do. Will his size be an issue? Possibly. It depends where you play him, because he can play multiple positions. But he's got a skill set. He's got a desire to work. He shed 30 pounds out of high school to where now he was a two-time SEC Player of the Year in one of the best conferences in the country. You can't be the SEC Player of the Year and not be able to play at a high level, at this level, in the NBA. I firmly believe that Grant Williams will be a factor at some point in a rotation in the NBA within the next couple of years. He's a great locker room guy, high character, and someone that you want to root for to have great success in the NBA. All right, so hope you enjoyed our mock draft here, 1 to 14 for the NBA Draft 2019 here on March Madness. I'm Andy Katz. You can watch our coverage on NBA TV tonight at 7 o'clock throughout the course of the draft, 7 to midnight. Check us all out. Thanks for watching.